Welcome to the presentation on textbooks and study strategies. A lot of information that you're going to see here is going to correlate with what you read about textbooks from last week's reading in the course text, Subjects Matters. And what we'll be exploring throughout this presentation is the good and the bad about textbooks and how to help prepare your students for assessments. So when we think about textbooks, think back to when you were a student. What were some of your thoughts? Probably, oh, my backpack's so heavy, these are boring, I don't really enjoy reading it, but I have to read it because it's part of the assignment. Those were probably a lot of the thoughts that you had. But textbooks do have some good benefits despite all of the negative comments that typically come with them. They're good as a reference tool, but they should not be used as your sole resource. Textbooks are very overwhelming for students because of the text complexity. It's bad for the multiple intelligences for students that are kinesthetic learners or learn in different ways, and for differentiation, for reaching all of your learners. And when we meet for our face-to-face days, we're going to talk about multiple intelligence and differentiation as well. Typically, when you use the textbooks, you do want to use them with other types of resources. And this is what we're talking about when we're talking about creating a text set. Finding other resources that help you to create a multi-source curriculum. So not just solely the textbook, but you have articles, web pages, magazines, other books, trade books to help to have your students understand what your topic is all about. You also need to have a purpose that drives what you do with the materials and how you help kids access it. I'll be talking about backward understanding by design. It's a backwards design where you create your unit thinking backwards. You first think about what it is that you want the students to come out to know, what are your 3 essential objectives, and then you work backwards. And as you work backwards, you think about the activities, the resources, how are you going to get your students to find this information and learn about this information. When you are buying textbooks, some of the main things to think about when buying a textbook is to criticize the vocabulary, the format of the textbook, the clarity of the information that's written there, the organization, and the quality. Are they going to be things that your students will be able to access if you're looking at a whole new set for purchasing for your curriculum? When you're using textbooks, you need to make sure that you are explicitly teaching students the following. To notice the textbook format, how the chapters are organized, the headings, if they have headings, if they have summaries, if they have just little extra sidebars, things as such, so that they know how to access more information. Look at the table of contents, the index, and the glossaries. Then you want to explore the text features and the visuals that are available. A lot of those graphic aids, you want to look at the type of print. Are the important words bold-faced, italicized, underlined, highlighted? Are there tables and graphs, maps, things like that that help to add to the information and teach them about using pictures and captions? A lot of times I have noticed that sometimes when students have come to me with questions about reading from their science textbook, they say, well, I can't find the information, Mrs. Schultz. And I'll read the question, and then I'll kind of flip through and quickly skim and scan, because that's what I teach the students to do, is to skim and scan the text. And then I'll see that there's a little picture with a caption under it. And I try to stress the importance of the text features and reading those text features instead of just focusing on the text, that's the paragraphs within. Also look at the graphic aids, because sometimes your information is going to be in those as well. You need to explicitly teach students the purpose and use of all of those things. The Common Core state standards say by the end of elementary that students should understand text features. They should understand how to navigate a textbook, text structures. However, being a middle school teacher, I've noticed that that isn't always the case, that it's important to still model and explicitly explain at the upper levels what the textbook format is, explore it together, look at different text features and what the purposes are of those text features. And that will help to ensure that your students make full use of all of the text features instead of, like I said, just skipping the graphic aids and focusing on the paragraph texts. One thing to remember when you're teaching the content areas is always to preview the chapter before reading. Have the students kind of skim and scan, get an idea, get a gist of what it is that they're going to be encountering throughout that chapter or chapters or unit of study. Challenges to overcome when using textbooks. Sometimes the organization is not very well laid out. It's hard to follow the progression of ideas. It's in the navigation of it, where to go next. The questions can sometimes be difficult, and the text structure of the textbook. Sometimes writing an information load that you see in textbook is hard because textbooks are not always written at students' levels. So helping them to find the clear main ideas, the amount of information can be overwhelming as well. Helping them to get the gist is one of the big things that you need to assist with when using textbooks. Helping students to paraphrase, and as a 6th grade teacher, I find that they still have trouble taking someone else's ideas and then synthesizing it into their own. And also taking notes. At the elementary level, there is not a lot of taking notes going on. It's something that is built upon throughout the rest of their academic careers in the middle school and the high school. And I think sometimes that's something that is forgotten, is that we need to model how to take notes and what effective note-taking looks like. The concepts and vocabulary, we've talked about vocabulary already and about how that content-specific vocabulary can be very difficult for students. So you need to help them to find the big ideas versus the concepts. Use their context to infer the vocabulary. So here's the word in context, help them to figure out what it means. And also ways to remember the terms. And those are some of the things that we'll be doing during our face-to-face days. And once again, help them to look at those visuals and analyze the graphics. Is there important information in that graphic? What is that graphic trying to show me? How does that graphic connect with the information in the paragraphs? So regardless of all the negative things that you've heard about using textbooks, there are some benefits for it, but a lot of the benefits need to happen after you've shown students how to use the material. And it sounds so simplistic. Students should be able to understand how to use a textbook, but many times they don't really encounter those textbooks and use them as heavily until they get to the middle school and high school. One big thing in the middle school and high school as well is study strategies and test taking. There's not been a lot of exposure in the elementary school with test taking. They may have spelling tests, they may have some vocabulary tests, but not the type of test taking that they will encounter when they're reading in the content areas. And what we've noticed over the years is that tests have kind of become their own genre. We find that teachers spend some time teaching how to take the test, and that is important because building strong readers is still the best way to prepare for a test. So you want to make sure that they can read, but you also want to help them and give them ways to best approach a test. So one of the first most obvious things to do is to build confidence in your students. You can do some practice. I know before the state test came, and if you had taught for the Badger exam, there were lots of practice tests that you could take for that. And even with the WKCE, when the state required that, there were still the practice tests that you could pull out and administer in your classroom so that your students had the practice. So filling in the bubbles, knowing what the questions we're going to ask. You need to help students have that can-do attitude of thinking that this test isn't too overwhelming, but I can do it. I'm going to do my best. A lot of times in class, the best ways to help to build those test-taking and study strategies is to have students share how they study. What are some of the things that they do when they study? And other students will build off of that. That's one of the first things I do within the first month of my 6th grade classroom is we talk about what are some of the strategies that you use for taking tests? And students suggest making note cards. Some of them say that they rewrite all the information, which was one of the ways that I studied when I was a kid. Other students said that they would have their parents ask some questions, or they'd get together with a friend and they would quiz each other on the information. So that can be powerful as well, that collaboration, that community that you have with your adolescent learners, having them discuss and share. You can introduce taking the test as a challenge, as beat the test. And one of the biggest things that I see in the middle school is having students justify their answers. Sometimes students just want to give an answer and there, I'm done. But as we get older, we know that you need to be able to justify your reasons for your thinking. So we need to teach kids how to explain why they answered the way they did. Why did they provide that answer? What was the evidence from the text? What was the evidence from their background that made them choose to answer the way that they did? Help students to understand the test format. We're going to talk about the QAR, the question-answer relationship, within our face-to-face days. And that helps students to truly understand how to find the information for the questions on a test. Give them answer sheets so that they can understand what's going to be on there. Tell them about the timing. Tell them the rules, especially if it's a state-mandated test, and let them practice with it. And then share samples. And a lot of this is with that test taking that happens at the state level. For big assessments, what you want students to do is to restate the questions and the directions in their own words. We know that when students can explain in their own words what it is that they need to do, that they're going to better understand it. Make sure that students are reading the titles, they're skimming and scanning the information, they're looking at the different features that are in those big assessments. They understand the genre, whether it's poetry they're reading and informational text. One of the best ways to start out a test is to read the questions first so you know what to look like as you're reading. And then have them, if it's appropriate in the big assessment, teach them how to highlight, underline key phrases as they read. Our job is not to stump kids without, so we need to get rid of that whole pop quiz idea, but to help them learn and access information. Think about how many times in the real world do you go into a testing situation without knowing what you're going to be tested on. Think about your driver's test. You know the expected outcomes. Think about when you go to the dentist's office. You know that they're going to be checking for how well you've been flossing, your brushing habits. They're going to look for those potential cavities. You know what you're going into in those real-world situations, and we need to provide the same for our students. So what can we do as teachers? We can provide students with ideas of what they're going to be assessed on and how they're going to be graded. So giving them those essential questions that you are expecting them to know by the end of the unit. The learning objectives, rubrics to help guide them, and study bookmarks. I'll share some of those when we're together on our face-to-face days. Give them examples of student-created essays, papers, projects, presentations that meet the expectations of what you're looking for. Then what can students do on their end? What can you encourage them to do? Encourage them to ask what's on the test. Have them make up their own sample questions. They might be ones that you want to use on the assessment. Vocabulary terms. They need to make sure that they study them. They should look at past tests that are given in the same class, if those are available, to get a gist of what that teacher is looking for. Work on those easy questions first. Come back to the harder ones. Put a little star next to them so you can come back to them later. Read all parts of the questions. I notice that a lot with students is that they will read the first question that's on there, even though there might be 4 different questions, and then just answer that first. And then they should go back and reread their answer and make sure that it says everything that they want it to say. They should eliminate any wrong answers that they know for sure do not match what the question's asking. And look for any negative words, the not, opposite, or the subjective words like best, so that they know what to focus on. Just some ideas. And when we get together for our face-to-face days, we will explore some more study strategies, test-taking skills that we can help our students build. All right, that's the end of our slideshow.